Let them die, that's an order. Colonel Vance Hollis smashed the handset into the console until the plastic burst open in his hand, then tore the radio out of the rack and threw it across the room, while 5 wounded Americans were still screaming for help on the open channel. Men flinched. Nobody moved. He killed the frequency himself, watched the signal go flat, and said it a second time so no one could pretend they hadn't heard. He knew Emily Carter was on that helicopter. He'd known her name for 11 years, and he left her in the sky to burn. Before we go further, please subscribe to this channel and stay with this story all the way to the end, and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. Captain Emily Carter had been awake for 26 hours when the call came in, and the first thing she did was check the batteries in her headlamp. Not her weapon, not her vest, the headlamp. Because in her experience, the thing that killed people out there was not usually a bullet. It was the dark and the shaking hands and the 40 seconds you lost fumbling for a light while somebody's blood ran out onto the floor of an aircraft. Carter! Sergeant Mike Delgado leaned into the tent rein running off his shoulders. They want you on the bird. Which bird? The one that's already turning. She stood up. She did not ask why. In 11 years, she had learned that the answer to why was always the same, and the answer was that somebody was bleeding. How many? 4 confirmed, maybe 5. Recon element took contact on a rescue pole, got chewed up pretty bad. Delgado hesitated. Ma'am, it's Kunar side of the ridge. Weather's closing. Then we should probably hurry. She was already walking. Chief Warrant Officer Ray Whitlock was in the left seat when she climbed aboard, and he did not look at her because Ray never looked at anybody when he was doing his checks. He had a rule about it. He said the moment a pilot starts looking at faces is the moment he starts flying for the faces instead of the aircraft. Doc, he said it to the windscreen. You strapped? Working on it. Work faster. Ceiling's dropping like a rock. His co-pilot was a kid named Tyler Nunn, 24 years old with a wife back in Georgia, and a photograph of an ultrasound taped inside his kneeboard where nobody was supposed to see it. Emily had seen it. She had never mentioned it. There was a whole language in that aircraft made of things nobody mentioned. Sir, Nunn's voice was too bright, too fast. Winds are gusting 30 out of the northwest at the pickup. Yep. And there's reporting of movement in the valley floor. Yep. That's a lot of yep, sir. Whitlock finally turned his head. Son, you want me to say something else? I can say something else. I can say, we're going to get killed. Would that help? Nunn laughed. It came out wrong, cracked in the middle. No, sir. Then, yep, they lifted at 0247. For the first 18 minutes, it was nothing. It was the most ordinary flight in the world. Emily sat with her back against the bulkhead and ran through it in her head, the way she always did, the way her old team leader had taught her a lifetime ago, before everything went wrong, in a place she never talked about. Airway, breathing, circulation. Say the names, always say the names he used to tell her. A man with a name fights harder than a man on a stretcher. Crew Chief Sergeant Honoraeus tapped her boot. You good, ma'am? I'm good. You've got that face. I don't have a face. You've got the face where you're already treating people who haven't been hurt yet. Emily almost smiled. That's just my face, Reyes? Uh-huh. Then the radio came alive and everything changed. Dust off 26, dust off 26. This is Ridgeline. Be advised your PZ is hot. Say again, PZ is hot. Whitlock keyed. Ridgeline 26 define hot. They're taking effective fire from the northern slope. Ground element is broken into 2 groups. They've got wounded they cannot move. How many? 5 urgent. 1 is a spinal, cannot be carried. 1 is bleeding out. Emily leaned forward into the intercom before Whitlock could answer. Ridgeline, this is 26 medical. Say status on the bleeder. A pause. A long one. The kind of pause that means someone on the other end is looking at something they wish they weren't. Medical, he's got a junctional wound. High and inside. They've packed it twice. Twice. Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. Then opened them. Chief, she said, how fast can you get me there? Whitlock did not answer with words. The aircraft simply tilted and the world went sideways, and Nunn made a small involuntary sound, and Reyes grabbed the ceiling strap and laughed out loud, and that was the answer. They came into the valley at 90 feet. What happened next happened in less time than it takes to read this sentence, and everybody who lived through it would spend the rest of their lives trying to stretch it back out into something that made sense. Reyes saw the flash first. She said one word, break. Whitlock broke. The thing that came up out of the rocks was not aimed at where the helicopter was. It was aimed at where the helicopter was going to be, which meant the man holding it had done this before and had been patient and had waited in the cold on a mountain for hours for exactly this and had felt nothing at all when he squeezed. It went through the tail boom. The aircraft did not explode. That is the part nobody understands who has not been there. There was no fireball. There was a sound like a hammer hitting a filing cabinet, and then the entire world began to spin, and the spinning was worse than any explosion because the spinning meant the sky had stopped being a place you could live in. Mayday, 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 dust off. 2-6, we are hit, we are hit. Chief Torque, I see it. Chief, we're losing. I see it, Tyler. Emily was on the floor. She had no memory of getting there. Her helmet had struck the bulkhead, and there was a warmth on her temple that she recognized, categorized, and dismissed in under a second. Scalp wound, bleeds like a river, means nothing. She got a hand on the cargo strap and pulled herself upright. Reyes. Nothing. Reyes. Here. Reyes' voice was thin. I'm here. I'm okay. I'm not okay. My arm's not right. Which arm? The one I need. Can you move your fingers? A pause. Yeah. Then it's the arm you need. Stay with the door. Whitlock's voice cut across everything. Doc, get up here. She went forward, hand over hand, the deck bucking under her like something alive and furious. Nunn's head was against the side glass. There was blood on the instruments, and she could not tell whose it was. Chief, talk to me. Tail rotor's gone soft. I got maybe partial authority. Maybe. He was fighting the pedals with both legs, and his forearms were shaking, and his voice was as flat as a table. Tyler took something through the door. I can't look. You look. She looked. Tyler Nunn was breathing. That was the first thing. He was breathing fast and shallow, and there was a hole in his flight suit at the left shoulder that was not making the sound you want a hole to make. Tyler, look at me. Say your name. His eyes rolled toward her and did not focus. Say your name, Tyler. Nunn. Full name. Tyler James Nunn. Good. Beautiful. Don't stop. She had her hand by his flight suit, and her fingers found the wound, and the world narrowed down to the size of a dime. Sucking chest, high. She got the seal out of her leg pocket with her teeth and had it down in 6 seconds. Tyler, you're going to feel me push. Push back. Push back against me. He pushed back. Barely, but he pushed. There he is. Doc. Whitlock still flat, still calm, and it was the calm that frightened her, because Ray Whitlock got calmer the way other men got louder. I need you to hear me. I hear you. We are not making it back to base. Okay. We're not making it out of this valley. Okay. I can maybe put us on a ridge. Maybe. And if I do, we're going to be sitting on a rock in the dark at 9,000 feet with 5 urgent from the ground element we never picked up, plus my co-pilot, plus whatever's left of Reyes' arm. So we're going to be busy. Whitlock actually laughed. One short bark. Yeah, Doc. We're going to be busy. Back at the operations center, 400 kilometers away, a room full of people watched a symbol on a screen do something a symbol is never supposed to do. It slowed. Then it wobbled. Then it began to drift off the rote line, and a young specialist named Marcus Webb said out loud without meaning to, "That's not a flight path. Get me comms." "They're broken, sir, they're..." "Get me comms." Colonel Vance Hollis walked in at 0311. He was 48 years old. He had never lost an aircraft, and he had built an entire career out of that sentence. He looked at the screen for 11 seconds. "Who's on that bird?" "Whitlock, Nunn, Reyes, and a medical officer, sir. Captain Carter." Something moved in his face. It was there and gone. Webb saw it and did not know what it meant and would think about it every day for the next 20 years. "Carter," Hollis said. "Yes, sir." "Emily Carter." "Yes, sir." Hollis turned to the weatherboard. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "What's the window?" 20 minutes, sir, maybe less. After that, the whole corridor closes and nothing flies until 0600 at the earliest." "And the threat picture?" "Active, sir. Whoever shot them is still up there, and they know exactly where that bird went down. Hollis nodded slowly. Then he said the thing. Negative on the extraction. That bird is a loss. Do not risk assets on a lost bird. The room did not react. That was the strange part. Nobody gasped. Nobody objected. It was as if the sentence had been so large that it needed a moment to land. Then a warrant officer named Frank Duvall, who was 51 and had exactly nothing left to lose, said, "Sir, don't. Sir, they're alive. We've got a partial squawk. That's not a loss. That's 5 plus 4. It's 9 dead men in 20 minutes instead of 9 dead men now, and a second aircraft in the rocks on top of them." Hollis's voice never rose. Not once. "You want to explain that to 9 families and then 8 more because I've done it. You haven't. Sir, say it again." Duvall looked at the screen. The symbol was still moving, slowly, wrongly, but moving. "Say it again, Chief," Duvall said quietly. "That bird is still flying, sir." And Vance Hollis said, "Then God help them because I can't." He said it twice, because the first time nobody moved. On the aircraft, Emily Carter did not know any of that. She would not know it for 11 months. What she knew was that Tyler Nunn's lips were going gray, and that Anna Reyes was holding the door gun with one hand because the other one had a bone in it that was no longer in a place bones go, and that Ray Whitlock was flying a helicopter that had stopped agreeing to be a helicopter. And she knew one more thing which she had never told anybody in the United States Army. She had done this before. Not this, but something enough like it that her hands already knew the shape of it. 7 years earlier, in a place that did not appear on any map she was allowed to discuss, Emily Carter had been part of a unit that went in to bring people out and had come back with fewer people than it left with. 2 of them had been hers. One of them had been holding her hand. She had walked away from all of it. Turned down the school, turned down the tab, turned down the picture on the wall. She had gone to be a medic, and when people asked her why, she said she liked the work, and they believed her because it was almost true. What she never said was the real reason. The real reason was that a medic's job is the only job in the world where you are allowed to refuse to accept the ending. Doc. Whitlock. 60 seconds. Say again. 60 seconds until I put us down or the mountain does. Get everybody tight. Emily turned around, and that was when she saw them. Because the ground element had not been where they were supposed to be. They had moved in the dark, carrying men who could not walk toward the sound of a helicopter that was already dying. And when Whitlock brought that broken aircraft down onto a shelf of rock, the size of a tennis court, there were 7 Americans standing in the rotor wash with their hands up and their faces open and their eyes saying the same thing every man's eyes have said in that moment since the invention of the helicopter. They said you came. Nobody had the heart to tell them. The skids touched. The aircraft settled hard, slid maybe a meter and stopped. The rotors kept turning because Whitlock kept them turning, and Whitlock kept them turning because the second he shut down, the aircraft became a rock, and the men outside became targets. And this became a very short story. Emily was out the door before the skids finished flexing. "Who's the bleeder?" A staff sergeant with a face like a closed fist grabbed her sleeve. "Ma'am, we can't." "Who's the bleeder?" "Sanchez, he's over there." "Ma'am, we've packed it twice, we can't." "Show me." They had him on a poncho. He was 22. His name was Oscar Sanchez, and he had a sister in El Paso who taught the 3rd grade, and Emily knew none of that yet, and she would know all of it before the sun came up. She got her hands into the wound and the world went away. Light, somebody give me light. 6 headlamps came on at once. "Not all of you, just you. Hold it right there and don't move it." "Ma'am, is he? What's your name?" "Brooks, ma'am, Daniel Brooks." "Hold the light, Daniel." She worked. Nobody who watched her that night was ever able to describe it properly. Reyes tried once years later at a bar in Killeen and gave up halfway through and just held up her hands and said, she wasn't hurrying. That's the thing, she wasn't hurrying. And when they asked what she meant, Reyes said, everybody hurries. Hurrying's how you know somebody's scared. She wasn't hurrying, she was just fast. 40 seconds and Sanchez stopped bleeding. 45 seconds in, Daniel Brooks started crying silently, still holding the light perfectly steady, because he was 19 years old and he had spent the last hour absolutely certain he was going to watch this man die. "Daniel." "Ma'am." "Light's good. You're doing good." "Ma'am, his voice broke completely. "Ma'am, I dropped him. Earlier. when we were moving. I dropped him, and I think that's why he's... Daniel, look at me. He looked. You carried a man up a mountain in the dark under fire. You dropped him one time, then you picked him back up. She never stopped moving her hands. You want to know what I see? I see somebody who picked him back up. Brooks nodded. He could not speak. Now hold the light. Behind them, Whitlock's voice came out of the aircraft, and it was the first time all night it was not flat. Doc, we got a problem. She did not look up. Which one? The good kind of problem is that I still have an engine. The bad kind of problem is that I've got about 9 minutes of it left before the transmission seizes. And when it seizes, we are here until somebody comes in. Doc. A pause. Nobody's coming. Now she looked up. Say that again. Comms are one way. I can hear them. They can't hear me. Whitlock's face in the green light was very old. And Doc, I heard them. What did you hear? I heard Hollis. The staff sergeant with the closed fist face said, What's a Hollis? Nobody answered him. Emily Carter stood up. Her hands were red to the wrist. There was blood in her hair from her own scalp, and she had not noticed it in 20 minutes. Around her on a rock in the dark at 9,000 feet, there were now 11 Americans, 4 of whom could not stand, 1 of whom could not breathe without a piece of plastic on his chest, and 1 of whom had a bone sticking out of her forearm and was still holding a machine gun. She looked at all of them. And then she said the thing that Daniel Brooks would repeat at his own wedding 7 years later to a room full of people who had no idea what he was talking about. Okay, she said, then we'll go to them. Whitlock stared at her. Say again. You've got 9 minutes of engine. Doc, you've got 9 minutes of engine, Ray. I've got 9 minutes of engine and no tail rotor authority and a co-pilot who's... He stopped because he had almost said it, and he did not say it because Tyler Nunn was 6 feet away and conscious enough to hear. Ray, I can't fly this. I'm not asking you to fly it. I'm asking you to fall in a direction of our choosing. The silence that followed lasted about 2 seconds and contained about 4 years. Then Ray Whitlock, 42 years old, 3,100 hours, 2 divorces, 1 dead brother, said, Ray, no, I'm thinking. Think faster. Doc, if I lift, I lose the ridge. If I lose the ridge, I can't get it back. There's no putting it down twice. It's one landing, and it's not going to be a landing. It's going to be an arrival. How far can we get? Downhill with gravity helping and God not actively hating us. He rubbed his face. 6, 7 kilometers, maybe 8. What's 8 kilometers downhill from here? None spoke. It cost him everything he had. Corridor. Everyone turned. Say again, Tyler. The low corridor. His eyes were closed. His hand moved an inch toward his knee board. Weather goes over the ridge. Not through the gap. If we're in the gap, we're under it. Whitlock got very, very still. He's right, he said. Oh my God, he's right. The corridor stays open. The corridor is always open. That's why nobody uses it. It's a shooting gallery. It's open, Emily said. It's open. Then that's where the rescue can reach us. Doc, there is no rescue. I told you, I heard him. He called it off. He looked at a screen with our names on it, and he called it off. And here is where the night turned, and everybody who was on that rock felt it turn, though not one of them could have told you why. Emily Carter wiped her hands on her thighs and said, Ray, do you know what the difference is between a man who calls off a rescue and a man who can't find one? What? About 8 kilometers. Rhea started laughing. She could not help it. She laughed with a broken arm on a mountain in Afghanistan, and it was the ugliest, most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard. And then Brooks started laughing, and then the staff sergeant with the closed fist face said, Ma'am, that is the craziest thing I have ever heard in my entire life. And Emily said, then get Sanchez on the bird. And he said, yes, ma'am. And he was already moving. They loaded 11 people into an aircraft rated for a lot fewer than 11 people. They did it in 4 minutes. Sanchez went in first because Sanchez could not be moved twice. The spinal corporal named Bo Kettering went in on a litter improvised from 2 rifles and a poncho, and Emily strapped his head between 2 full water bottles with cravats. And Kettering said through his teeth, Ma'am, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And Emily said, it's field expedient corporal. And Kettering said, it's 2 Nalgene's. And Emily said, it's two-field expedient Nalgene's. And Kettering laughed and then screamed and then laughed again. Nunn stayed in the right seat because there was nowhere else to put him. And because Whitlock needed a second pair of hands, even if those hands could only manage one switch, and Emily crouched between the seats with her fist on Tyler Nunn's chest seal and her mouth by his ear. Tyler. Yeah. Tell me about the ultrasound. His eyes opened. Yeah, she said. I know. I've known for 4 months. Tell me. Ooh, it's a girl. What's her name? We haven't. Then you better get home and pick one, because if you leave that to your wife alone, she's going to name her something with 3 Y's in it, and you'll have to live with it forever. Tyler Nunn laughed. It was a horrible sound. His whole body seized around it. But his eyes stayed open, and they stayed open for the next 40 minutes, and every single person on that aircraft is alive today, partly because of a joke about a name that did not exist yet. Whitlock's hands were on the controls. Everybody listen, he said, and now his voice was not flat at all. This aircraft is going to leave this ridge, and it is never going to fly again. When we go, we go. There is no changing our minds. If anybody's got something to say it now. Nobody said anything. Then Daniel Brooks said, Sir, are we going to make it? And Ray Whitlock said, Son, I've got no idea, but the doc says we're going, and I've been doing this 19 years, and I have never once seen anybody argue with her and win. Emily said, Ray, yeah, Doc. Go. 400 kilometers away, Specialist Marcus Webb was staring at a screen where a symbol had been sitting motionless for 11 minutes. Colonel Hollis was standing at the back of the room with his arms folded. He had not left. That was the thing Webb could never explain later. The man had written them off, and then he had not left the room, not for a second, not to eat, not to sleep, not to make a call. He stood there and he watched a dead symbol on a screen for 11 minutes, and he did not blink. And then the symbol moved. Webb said, Sir. Hollis did not answer. Sir, it's moving. I see it. Sir, it's moving downhill. It's moving fast. Webb's hands were shaking on the keyboard. Sir, that's not a crash slide. That's under power. That's controlled. Frank Duval stood up so fast his chair went over. They're in the corridor, Duval said. Sir, look at the track. They're going for the corridor. Hollis walked forward, slowly. He put one hand on the back of Webb's chair and leaned in and looked at that screen the way a man looks at something he has already grieved. Nobody flies the corridor, he said. No, sir. Nobody flies the corridor because the corridor is where you get killed. Yes, sir. The corridor is also, Hollis said, and something in his voice came apart just slightly, just at the edge. The only place under this weather. Nobody breathed. And then Colonel Vance Hollis said, Chief Duval, Sir, how many birds can you put in the air in 6 minutes? Duval was already running. 2, sir. Get me 3. Sir, you said. Hollis turned around and Marcus Webb saw his face, and Marcus Webb would spend 20 years failing to describe it to anybody. I said, do not risk assets on a lost bird, Hollis said. That bird is not lost. Somebody on that aircraft refused to be lost. And I will not be the man who let her do that alone. He was already reaching for the handset. Sir, who do I tell them is authorizing this because the weather's outside limits and the threat's outside limits. And if this goes wrong, tell them Hollis. Sir. Tell them Hollis, he said, and tell them I have been waiting 11 years to say her name into this radio, and it is not going to be to a next of kin. And in the aircraft dropping down a mountain in the dark at 110 knots, with no tail rotor, and 9 minutes of engine, and 11 Americans holding on to each other. Emily Carter pressed her fist into Tyler Nunn's chest and said, say her name. She doesn't have one. Then make one up. Right now, say it. And Tyler Nunn, 24 years old with a hole in his chest and a photograph in his knee board, said, Grace. Grace, Emily said. Okay, Grace. She's waiting. Yeah. So we're going. Below them, the corridor opened up like a door. They went off the ridge the way a piano goes off a roof. Whitlock did not lift. That was the trick of it, and nobody outside that aircraft ever understood it. He did not pull power and climb. He rolled the whole machine off the edge of the shelf and let the mountain do the work, and for 4 full seconds, Dustoff 26 was not a helicopter at all. It was 11 Americans falling in a metal box. Somebody screamed. Nobody ever admitted who. Airspeed, Whitlock said. Come Come on, sweetheart, give me airspeed. Chief, not now, Doc. The rotors bit at 70 knots. The nose came up maybe 3 degrees, and that was all. And 3 degrees was enough, and the aircraft stopped falling and started flying in the ugliest, most sideways imitation of flight any of them had ever felt. Without a tail rotor, she wanted to spin. Whitlock held her straight with speed alone, the way you hold a weather vane straight by pointing it into the wind, and the only cost was that he could never ever slow down. Not once. Not for a second. Not until the end. 319. Everybody hear me, Whitlock said. This bird flies at 100 knots, or she does not fly. There is no hover. There is no slow. When we get where we're going, and we are going to hit the ground moving, and it is going to hurt, and that is the good outcome. Nobody answered him. There was nothing to answer. Emily Carter had her fist buried in Tyler Nunn's chest and her knees braced against the center console, and she had stopped feeling her legs about a minute ago. Tyler, say it. Grace, again. Grace, louder. Grace, his voice cracked open. God, Doc, it hurts. I know. It really hurts. I know, baby. Keep breathing anyway. Behind her, a voice said, ma'am. And it was Brooks, and it was the wrong kind of loud, and Emily's whole body went cold before her brain caught up. What? Ma'am, he's bleeding again. 40 seconds. That is how long Oscar Sanchez had stayed packed. 40 seconds of stillness on a rock, and then 11 people had thrown him into an aircraft and dropped that aircraft off a mountain, and physics had done what physics does. Emily looked at Nunn. She looked at her own hand holding a seal on a man's chest, and she understood in one flat instant that she had 2 patients in one pair of hands, and about 90 seconds before one of them was gone. Brooks. Ma'am, get up here. Ma'am, I'm holding his. Get up here now, Tame. He came. He crawled over 2 wounded men and a spine board made out of rifles, and he got to her, and his face was 19 years old and completely empty. Emily took his right hand. She put it flat on Tyler Nunn's chest over the seal, over her own blood, and she pressed down on top of it hard enough to bruise. That's your hand now. Ma'am, say it. That's my hand. If you move it, he dies. If you get scared, he dies. If the aircraft flips upside down and catches fire, your hand does not move. Do you understand what I just gave you? Brooks stared at her. Something behind his eyes stood up. Yes, ma'am. Say his name. Tyler. Say his daughter's name. Brooks blinked. Grace, ma'am? Then you have got them both. And she was gone hand over hand into the back, into the dark, into Oscar Sanchez. 321. She got the packing out and it came out in a wet fist of red, and Sanchez made a sound like a door opening. The staff sergeant with the closed fist face, his name was Wendell Pryor, 34 from Mobile, Alabama, and he had been carrying this kid for 2 hours, grabbed her shoulder. Ma'am, tell me what to do. Get your knee on his hip. His hip. Junction's high. I can't get above it with my hands. I need his whole body to stop moving, and this aircraft won't let it, so you're going to be the thing that stops it. She had both fists in the wound now, up to the wrist, and her forearms were shaking with the effort of it. Your knee, hip, now. Pryor put his knee on a dying man's hip and leaned his entire 210 pounds into it, and Oscar Sanchez screamed, and Emily said, good, that's a beautiful sound, Oscar. He's screaming, ma'am. Screaming means blood in the brain. Screaming is the best news I've had all night. Reyes from the door, one-handed teeth locked. Doc, I've got movement. Left side, 200 meters hillside. Can they reach us? At 100 knots in the dark, they'd have to be lucky. Are they lucky? Reyes laughed. Somebody up here is, ma'am. It hasn't been us yet. 323. 400 kilometers away, Colonel Vance Hollis had a handset in his hand and the entire weight of a career on the other end of it. Say again your last Kandahar. I said the corridor is a no-fly, full stop. That's a standing restriction, sir. That's not mine. That came down 2 years ago after we lost. I know what we lost. Then, sir, respectfully, I can't launch into it. I don't have the authority. You have the authority to say yes. Sir, you have exactly as much authority to say yes as you do to say no, and the only difference between those 2 words tonight is 9 Americans. Hollis's knuckles were white on the plastic. Say yes. Silence on the line. 4 seconds. Marcus Webb watched a vein move in the colonel's temple. Sir, if this goes bad, it's your name. It's already my name, Hollis said. It's been my name for 7 years. He hung up. Frank Duval was in the doorway with his helmet already on. Sir, 3 birds, Marsh and Kowalczyk are turning. Third's got a hydraulics write-up. Is it flyable? It's flyable if nobody reads the write-up. Then nobody reads the write-up. Duval didn't move. Sir, permission to say a thing. Make it fast. 20 minutes ago you called it off. Duval's voice was very steady. I've served under you 6 years. I have never seen you change your mind. Not once. So I need to know before I put 2 crews into that hole, sir. What's on that helicopter? Hollis looked at him for a long moment. A debt, he said. Go. 326. The transmission chip light came on. It was a small amber light about the size of a dime on a panel full of lights, and it meant that somewhere inside the gearbox above their heads, metal was coming off metal in pieces large enough to be detected. It meant the clock had started. Whitlock stared at it. Doc. Emily was elbow deep in Sanchez. Kind of busy, Ray. Chip light. Her hands did not stop. Meaning the gearbox is eating itself. Meaning when it seizes the rotor stops, and when the rotor stops, we fall like a manhole cover. How long? Could be 20 minutes, could be 20 seconds. It's not a countdown, Doc. It's a lottery. Then don't tell anybody. They can hear me on the intercom. Then say something else. Whitlock keyed the intercom and said in his flattest voice, Everybody, this is the chief. We got a light on the panel. It's a nuisance light. Happens all the time. Nobody believed him, but Kettering, strapped to 2 rifles with water bottles taped to his head, said out loud, Nuisance light. Copy that, sir. And that was the moment 11 people agreed to lie to each other for as long as it took. Pryor said quietly, Ma'am, that's a lie, isn't it? Keep your knee on his hip, Sergeant. Yes, ma'am. 328, Tyler Nunn stopped talking. Brooks felt it first, not saw. Felt through his hand, through the seal, through the chest that had been rising and falling under his palm for 7 minutes, and now was doing something wrong. Ma'am, his voice went up an octave. Ma'am. Talk. He's fighting me. He's pulling his neck. Ma'am, his neck is... Emily was moving before he finished the sentence. She left both hands inside Oscar Sanchez, and she left them there by transferring them in one motion to Wendell Pryor's hands, and she did it by grabbing his wrists and shoving them into the wound and saying 4 words. 2 fingers, push down. Ma'am, I'm not a... 2 fingers, push down, don't stop. And she was over him and into the cockpit, and she saw Tyler Nunn's neck veins standing out like cables and his trachea sitting off to one side where a trachea does not sit, and she said out loud to nobody, Oh, you son of a... Doc, Whitlock, fighting the pedals, not able to turn his head. Doc, talk to me. Tension pneumo. English. His chest is filling with air and squeezing his heart shut. She had her shears out. He's got about 90 seconds. What do you need? For you to fly straight. I can't fly straight. Then fly less crooked. She found the second rib. In a shaking aircraft in the dark, in a helmet with one thumb, she found the second rib on a man's left side, and she counted down and she put a needle through him. The sound it made was the best sound in the world. It was a hiss, just a hiss. And Tyler Nunn's chest fell about an inch, and his eyes flew open, and he took a breath so deep and so hungry that Brooks started sobbing out loud, and Whitlock said, What was that? What was that noise? And Emily said, That's your co-pilot Ray. He alive. Tyler, name. Tyler James Nunn. Daughter. Grace, he's alive. Whitlock made a sound. It was not a word. Ray Whitlock, 3,100 hours, 2 divorces. 1 dead brother, made a sound like a man setting down something heavy. Then he said, Doc, new problem. Of course there is. The corridor bends. 331. Here is what nobody in that aircraft understood except Ray Whitlock, and it took him 11 seconds to explain it, and those 11 seconds cost him more than anything else that night. He could not turn. Not properly. A helicopter with no tail rotor turns by rolling and rolling, costs altitude, and they had exactly as much altitude as the mountain was willing to give them, and not 1 foot more. Every meter they descended was a meter they could never buy back because they had no power to climb. They had a gearbox eating itself in an engine that had been running on borrowed time since minute 9. The corridor ran downhill for 6 kilometers, and then it bent left around a shoulder of rock. If they made the bend, they were in the open and the weather was over their heads instead of on top of them, and a rescue aircraft could physically reach them. If they missed the bend, they hit the shoulder. How much room? Emily asked. I need to lose 400 feet in about 11 seconds to make the roll, and then I need to not hit the wall on the other side by about the width of this aircraft. Can you do it? On a good day with a good bird in daylight. Whitlock's laugh was terrible. Maybe. And tonight I've got a nuisance light, Reyes said from the door. Chief, if you roll left, the door's on the low side. Yeah. I'm on the door. Yeah. Chief, if you roll left with the door open at 110 knots, I'm getting out. The whole aircraft heard it, every single one of them. Emily said, Reyes, get on the floor now. Ma'am, if I'm off the gun, we've got no gun. Get on the floor. Ma'am, there's people down there and they can see us, and if we come around that bend at 400 feet with nobody on the Anna. Emily used her first name. She had never once in 3 years used her first name. Get on the floor. Reyes got on the floor. She got on the floor with a broken arm, and she hooked her good hand into the cargo ring, and she looked up at Emily Carter and she said, Ma'am, I want you to know I'm real mad about this. Noted. Real mad. I'll write it up. 334. 10 seconds, Whitlock said. Everybody grab something that isn't a person. Brooks did not move his hand. He had a hand on Tyler Nunn's chest, and the aircraft was about to go over on its side at 110 knots, and 19-year-old Daniel Brooks did not move his hand. He wedged his boot under a seat rail and hooked his free arm through a strap, and he left his right hand exactly where a captain had put it 7 minutes ago, and Emily saw him do it, and something in her chest turned over. 5. Pryor had 2 fingers inside Oscar Sanchez, and his knee on the man's hip, and his forehead pressed against the bulkhead, and he was praying out loud, not quietly in full sentences. 3. Kettering, who could not move at all, who could feel nothing below his collarbones, said to the ceiling, Hey, Doc. Little busy corporal. Ma'am, if this goes bad, my mom's name is Renee. 2. Renee Kettering, Tulsa. 1. Tell her I wasn't scared. Emily said, tell her yourself. And Ray Whitlock rolled that helicopter onto its side. The world went vertical. Every unsecured thing in the cabin became a projectile. A medical bag hit the ceiling, which was now a wall. Somebody's helmet went past Emily's face at head height and out the open door and into the dark. The engine screamed at a pitch none of them had ever heard, and the airframe made a noise like a ship breaking up. And for 2.5 seconds, gravity simply stopped having an opinion. Emily Carter did not hold on to anything. She held on to Wendell Pryor's wrists, and she pushed because Sanchez was on the low side, and the blood in him was on the low side, and the only thing between that boy and the end of everything was pressure. And pressure does not care what angle the sky is at. The rotor missed the rock by less than the length of a car. And then they were level, and they were through, and they were out. 335. Whitlock started laughing. He could not stop. He laughed with tears running down his face and his hands still locked on the controls, and he said, I did it. I did it. Did you see that? Did anybody see that, Tyler? Did you see that? And Tyler Nunn from the right seat with a needle in his chest and a hole in him and a hand on him that belonged to a boy from Ohio said, saw it, Chief. And the entire aircraft came apart. Not physically, emotionally. Pryor was howling. Reyes was pounding the floor with the flat of her good hand. Brooks was laughing and crying at the same time and still not moving his hand. For 9 seconds, 11 Americans in a dying helicopter were the happiest people on earth. Then the engine quit. 336, it did not sputter. It did not warn them. There was a bang like the end of the world, and then there was silence. And the silence was so much worse than any noise that Brooks would wake up from it for the next 30 years. Auto-rotating, Whitlock said. His voice was flat again. Instantly, completely. Everybody brace. This is it. This is the arrival. Emily said, Ray, how far to the floor? Doesn't matter. Ray, Doc, it doesn't matter. I'm not flying anymore. I'm falling with style. There's a wash down there. It's flat. It's rock. And we are going to hit it at about 40 knots, and I need everybody to understand something. Say it. When we stop, we stop. Nobody's going to carry anybody. If you can walk, you walk, and if you can't walk, you're going to have to make peace with that in the next 20 seconds. Kettering said, "Well, that's me." Nobody laughed. And Emily Carter said, "Nobody's making peace with anything." Brooks. "Ma'am?" Hand. "Hasn't moved, ma'am." "I know it hasn't. Pryor." "Ma'am." Fingers. "Still in, ma'am." Reyes. "Floor, ma'am. Still mad." "Good." Emily got her back against the bulkhead and her boots against the litter that held Bo Kettering, and she jammed herself into the airframe like a wedge, and she made herself into the thing that would keep a spinal injured man from becoming a projectile. And she said the last thing anybody heard before impact. "Everybody say a name, right now, out loud, somebody who's waiting." And they did. Whitlock said Marcus, his brother, dead 11 years. He said it anyway. Reyes said Mama. Pryor said Tanya and the girls. Kettering said Renee. Brooks said Grace. And it wasn't his, and he said it anyway. None said nothing because he was crying too hard. And Emily Carter said out loud in a helicopter falling out of the sky in Afghanistan a name that not one person on that aircraft had ever heard before. She said Colonel. They hit at 0337, 341. 400 kilometers away, Marcus Webb watched the symbol on his screen stop moving. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. He looked at the timestamp and he wrote it in the log because that was his job, and his hand shook so badly the numbers came out crooked. Behind him, Hollis said, "Where?" "Sir." "Where did it stop?" "Wash floor, sir. South end of the corridor. Grid." Webb's voice failed. He tried again. "Sir, I have to tell you, that's a drop of about 600 feet in 90 seconds. That's not a landing profile, Discretion." "I know what it is." "Sir, nobody survives." "I said I know what it is." Hollis leaned over him. "Is the squawk still up?" Webb looked. He looked for a long time, and then he said, "Sir." "Talk." "Sir, the squawk is still up." The room made a sound. "Sir, the aircraft's power should be gone. The squawk should be gone. That squawk is running off the emergency battery, sir, and somebody has to physically hold a switch for that to happen. That's a manual function." Webb turned around in his chair and his face was wide open. "So somebody's alive down there and they're holding the switch." Hollis closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he said, "Duval." "He's airborne, sir, 6 minutes out." "Get me his frequency." "Sir, he's in the corridor. Comms are." "Get me his frequency." 343. At the bottom of the wash in the dark, in a helicopter that was lying on its side with its rotors sheared off and its tail 40 meters behind it in the rocks, Emily Carter came back. She came back the way people do in pieces badly, with the taste of copper in her mouth and no memory of the last 30 seconds. Her left arm was wrong. Not broken. Dislocated high ugly, and it was screaming at her, and she noted it, categorized it, and dismissed it in under a second. "Sound off," she said. "Nothing." "I said sound off." A voice cracked. Pryor. "Are your fingers in him?" Or a pause, a horrible pause. "Ma'am, I don't know." "Then find out." "Ma'am, I can't see, I can't." "Find out." She heard him move. She heard him make a noise. And then Wendell Pryor said with his whole soul in it, "They're in, ma'am. They're still in. He's warm. Ma'am, he's warm." Reyes. "Here." Barely. "Ma'am, I think my arm's worse." Kettering. Silence. Kettering. "Here." A whisper. "Ma'am, I didn't feel any of that." "That's the first good news of your night, Corporal." Ma'am, I want to laugh, but I don't know how to anymore." Brooks. "Nothing." Daniel. "Nothing." Emily got up. Her arm hung and she got up anyway, and she went through the wreck of that aircraft on her knees in the dark, and she found Daniel Brooks folded against the forward bulkhead with his boots still wedged under the seat rail. His hand was on Tyler Nunn's chest. It had never moved. Not through the roll, not through the fall, not through impact at 40 knots into rock. 19 years old, unconscious, with a scalp laid open and 2 broken ribs, and Daniel Brooks's right hand was flat and hard on the chest seal of a man he had met 90 minutes ago. Emily Carter put her forehead against the bulkhead, and for the first time in 7 years, she came very close to breaking. For about 1 second, then she said, "Ray." Nothing. "Ray." Nothing. Chief Whitlock sound off, and a voice from the cockpit, thin, wet, wrong, said, "Doc, I'm still holding it." She went forward. Ray Whitlock was pinned. The console had come back into him, and there was no version of the next few hours where Ray Whitlock walked out of that seat, and he knew it, and he had known it since impact. And his right thumb was on the emergency transponder switch. Ray, don't. Ray, let me see. Doc, if I let go of this, they can't find us. His voice was almost gentle. It's a spring switch. It don't stay. Somebody's got to hold it. Then I'll hold it. You got 9 people to work on. Ray, Doc. He turned his head. It cost him something enormous. I got no legs left. I've known that for 4 minutes. I did the math while you were unconscious, and I figured out there's exactly one job on this aircraft a man with no legs can do. Emily could not speak. So you go do your job, Ray Whitlock said, and I'll do mine, and don't you dare take this away from me. 347, 6 minutes out in the worst weather in the corridor, Frank Duvall's radio came alive with a voice from 400 kilometers away. Duvall Hollis, do you read? Barely, sir. Listen to me. You are going to see a squawk on the wash floor. It is on emergency battery. That means a human being is holding it. Understood, sir. Duvall, when that squawk goes out, it does not mean they're gone. It means whoever's holding it is. Silence on the line. Duvall, sir. There is something you need to know before you go in there because you asked me a question tonight and I gave you a coward's answer. Duvall's co-pilot looked at him. Sir, this isn't the time. 7 years ago, Hollis said there was a team in the Korengal, civilians in a compound. It went bad, and a young NCO on the ground called for an extraction, and she called for it 11 times, and the man on the other end of that radio looked at the weather and looked at the threat and said no. Nobody breathed. She lost 4 people that night. 2 of them were hers. One of them died holding her hand, and she stayed on that radio and she kept calling, and she never once raised her voice. Duvall said very quietly, Sir. That man was me, Colonel Vance Hollis said, and her name was Emily Carter. And tonight, 28 minutes ago, God gave me the exact same decision, and I made the exact same mistake. And I want you to understand that she is down there right now doing the same thing she did 7 years ago. What's that, sir? Refusing to accept the ending. Hollis's voice broke completely, and 400 kilometers of radio silence carried it perfectly. Chief, I have spent 7 years being the reason she quit. Go be the reason she was right. 351. In the wash, Emily Carter had her arm hanging useless, and 9 people on the ground, and no aircraft, and no light, and no time, and she worked. She worked the way Reyes could never explain in a bar in Killeen. Not hurrying, just fast. She reduced her own shoulder against a rock by throwing her body weight against it, and she screamed once briefly, and then she did not mention it again for 11 hours. She got Brooks breathing. She got Sanchez's wound repacked with Pryor's hands guided by her voice. She got Kettering's head immobilized with a rifle sling and a boot. And every 40 seconds, she called out Ray. And every 40 seconds, Ray Whitlock said, still holding, Doc. At 0354, he said, still holding. At 0356, he said, holding. At 0358, he said, Doc, hey, do me a favor, say the name. Which name? The one you said when we were falling. A wet, awful laugh. You said Colonel. Doc, who the hell is Colonel? Emily Carter on her knees in the rocks with a boy's blood on her hands said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, a man who owes me 4 people. He gonna pay? No. Then why'd you say his name? And Emily said, because I wanted him to hear it. At 400, Ray Whitlock said, Doc. Ray, I hear something. Everyone stopped. And out of the storm, low, impossibly low in a corridor, no aircraft was allowed to fly, came a sound that 11 Americans had stopped believing in. Rotors. Ray, Emily said. Ray, hold that switch. Hold it. Hold it. Ray, there. I hear him, Doc. Ray, don't you let go. I ain't let go of nothing in 19 years, Ray Whitlock said. And then the rotors got closer and the light came down through the weather like something out of a church. And Frank Duvall's voice came over a handheld radio lying in the rocks beside a dead helicopter. And he said 11 words that Wendell Pryor had tattooed on his forearm 9 months later. Any station, this net. This is Dust Off 6. We see you. Nobody answered him. That was the thing Frank Duvall could never explain afterward. He had a squawk. He had a light on a shattered aircraft. He had 11 words out and 11 Americans down there, and not one of them answered. And for 4 full seconds, he sat in that cockpit at 90 feet in weather that had no business letting him live, and believed he had come all this way to recover bodies. Then the handheld crackled, and a woman's voice came up out of the rocks absolutely level. Dust off 6, this is 2-6 medical. We are 9 urgent and 2 ambulatory. Do not land in the wash. Duvall's co-pilot, a kid named Sam Ostrowski, turned and stared at him. Say again, medical. Do not land in the wash. The floor is loose rock, and you will roll. There is a shelf 200 meters south-north side. It's flat and it's short. You will not like it. Medical, how short? A pause. Chief, I'm a medic. I have no idea. It's shorter than this helicopter is long. And Frank Duvall started to laugh, and he keyed the mic without meaning to, so all of them heard it, all of them, down in the rocks, a man laughing in a helicopter above them, which was the single most alive sound any of them had heard in an hour. Medical, I'm coming to you. Talk me down. Chief, I can't see you. Ma'am, I can't see you either. That's why we're going to talk. 402, Emily. Carter had a handheld radio in her right hand, and a shoulder that had come out of its socket and gone back in, and a man 40 meters behind her holding a spring switch with his thumb because he had no legs left to hold anything else with. She lay flat on her back in the rocks so she could look straight up. Chief, I hear you left. Coming right. Too far, too far. You're going into the wall. Copy correcting. Chief, listen to me. When you hear my voice get loud, you're on top of us. When it gets loud, you stop coming down. Understood. You're getting loud. Copy. You're loud. Copy. Chief, you are extremely, Ostrowski screamed, rock, rock, rock. And Frank Duvall did something with a helicopter that no simulator has a name for. He came in flat, and he put his left skid on the shelf, and he left the right one hanging over 400 feet of nothing, and he held it there, one skid down, rotors turning the entire aircraft balanced on the edge of the world like a bird on a wire. And he said into the radio in the calmest voice of his life, Medical dust off 6. I'm down. Sort of. Bring me your worst. 404. Wendell Pryor said, Ma'am, we got a problem. Which one? There's 4 seats, ma'am. Emily turned around. She had 9 urgent. She had a boy with a junctional wound who had already died twice tonight, a corporal who could not feel his own body, a co-pilot with a needle in his chest, a 19-year-old with a skull that had met a bulkhead, a crew chief with a bone out through the skin, a pilot who was pinned, and 3 more from the ground element who had been quietly bleeding into their uniforms for 2 hours without once complaining because they were not the worst and they knew it. She had 4 seats. Ma'am, Pryor's voice was cracking. Ma'am, who goes? Emily. Carter did not hesitate. That was the part that broke Wendell Pryor for the rest of his life. She did not hesitate. Not for a heartbeat. Because she had done this before on a different mountain 7 years ago, and she had learned that hesitation is not mercy. Hesitation is just cowardice wearing mercy's coat. Sanchez, Nunn, Kettering, Brooks. Ma'am, Brooks is walking. Brooks has a head injury, and he doesn't know he has a head injury, and in 20 minutes he's going to be unconscious, and I will not have a working aircraft. He goes. Ma'am, Reyes has a bone out of her arm. Reyes is not going to die of it. Anna Reyes from the Rock said, correct, ma'am. Sergeant, you have a compound fracture. Ma'am, I have a compound fracture and a heartbeat, Reyes said. Put the kid on the bird. And Pryor said, ma'am, what about you? Anna Molly said, get them moving. 406. They carried them 200 meters over broken rock in the dark, with one working arm between the 3 of them who could walk. Sanchez went first on the poncho with Pryor's 2 fingers still inside him, and Emily walked alongside with her hand on Pryor's wrist, correcting the angle every 8 steps, and Sanchez screamed the entire way. And every scream was a gift, and every time he stopped screaming, Emily said, Oscar, and he started again. Duvall's crew chief, a big quiet man named Terrence Wade, came off that hanging aircraft and met them halfway, and his face when he saw them was something none of them ever discussed. Ma'am, he said, Ma'am, what happened up there? Later. Ma'am, how many are you? Later, Sergeant. Take him. Wade took Sanchez, and then he said, Ma'am, I got to tell you something, and I got to tell you fast. We can't lift with 4. Emily stopped moving. Say that again. Density altitude, ma'am. We're at 9,000. We came in heavy on fuel because we didn't know how far we were going. We're one skid on a shelf, and Chief says, Wade swallowed. Chief says 3. 3 plus crew. He says 4, and we don't come off this rock, we just slide off it. Emily looked at the 4 men on the ground. Ma'am, Wade said, I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm so sorry. And Daniel Brooks, who had a hole in his scalp and 2 broken ribs, and did not know yet that his brain was bleeding, sat up on the rocks and said, Then it's me. Brooks, ma'am, I'm walking. He got to his feet. He swayed, he stayed up. I'm walking, ma'am. Put Kettering on the bird. He can't feel his legs. I can feel mine, and I'd like to keep him, but I can feel him. Brooks, you have a head injury. Ma'am? And 19-year-old Daniel Brooks looked at her with his face full of blood and said, You gave me his hand. You said if I got scared, he dies. Well, I'm scared right now, ma'am, and I'm still not moving. Emily Carter closed her eyes. Then she said, Wade, 3. Sanchez, none Kettering. Go. Ma'am. Go. 409. Duvall took off by falling. He rolled that aircraft right off the shelf into 400 feet of open air and let it drop until it flew exactly the way Ray Whitlock had done 90 minutes earlier. And Emily Carter watched it go and understood that the two of them had never met and had just made the same decision with the same aircraft on the same mountain, and that there was a whole brotherhood in this world that never talks about itself. The radio in her hand said, Medical dust-off 6. I've got your 3. Copy. Medical. A long pause. Ma'am, I'm going to be 40 minutes. Copy. Ma'am, the weather's closing behind me. 40 minutes is optimistic. Copy. Ma'am, is there anything you need me to tell anybody in case? And Emily said, yes. Duvall waited. Tell Colonel Hollis. Emily Carter said that this time I've got 8. Silence on the net. Then in a voice Duvall did not recognize as his own, Ma'am, say again. He'll understand. 412. She went back to Ray. She went the 200 meters at a dead run in the dark over rock that had already broken her once, and she got to the wreck and dropped to her knees at the shattered right side of that cockpit, and she said, Ray, still holding. Ray, they've got 3 out. I know, I heard. His voice had changed. It had gotten light. It had gotten far away, and Emily Carter had heard that exact change in 4 other men in her life, and she hated it with everything she had. Which 3? Sanchez, Kettering, Tyler. Ray Whitlock made a sound. Tyler's out. Tyler's out. Doc. He was crying. He was crying and his thumb never moved off that switch. Doc, he's got a kid coming. I know. Grace, I know Ray. That's a good name, Ray Whitlock said. That's a real good name. And then he said, Doc, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not argue. No, Essie. You don't even know what it is. I know exactly what it is, and the answer's no. Doc, you want me to leave you here holding a switch and go work on somebody who can be saved? Her voice did not shake. That was the terrible part. It did not shake once. And the answer is no, because I'm going to do both. You can't do both. Ray Whitlock, I have been doing both my entire adult life. 414. 400 kilometers away, a room full of people heard 8 words come out of a speaker and did not understand a single one of them. Tell Colonel Hollis that this time I've got 8. Marcus Webb turned around in his chair. Vance Hollis was standing perfectly still. Sir, nothing. Sir, what does that mean? And Hollis said, it means she's counting. Sir, 7 years ago, she came off that mountain with 4. His voice was very quiet and very flat, and Webb had never been so frightened in his life. She counted them out loud on the radio to me. 1 at a time. She said their names, and then she said, Colonel, that's 4. And then she never spoke to me again. Nobody in that room moved. She's telling me she's got 8, Hollis said. She's telling me she has 8 people, and I have already said no once tonight, and she wants me to know exactly what the number is this time. He picked up his helmet. Webb said, Sir? Sir, what are you doing? Get me Marsh. Sir Chief Marsh is... Get me Marsh and tell him he's got a passenger. Sir, you're a full colonel. You haven't flown in 6 years, 4 months, Hollis said. Get him. Frank Duvall's voice came over the net, thin and ragged. Base dust-off 6. I have 3 urgent inbound, and be advised I have 8 souls remaining in that wash, and I have a full colonel's worth of nothing to do about it. And Vance Hollis leaned over the console, keyed the mic himself, and said the first thing he had said on that frequency in 7 years that was not an order. Dust off 6, this is Hollis. I'm coming. 417, Emily worked. She got Ana Reyes's arm, splinted with a strut, off a broken seat, and Reyes bit down on a cravat and did not make one sound. And when it was done, Reyes said through her teeth, "Ma'am, permission to say the thing." "Say it. You're not going on that bird either, are you?" "Sergeant, ma'am, I've known you 3 years. You're going to put every one of us on that helicopter, and then you're going to find some reason there's no room for you." Reyes's eyes were shining. "You did it in your head an hour ago. I watched you do it." Emily did not answer. "Ma'am, that ain't heroism," Reyes said. "That's something else, and I've been trying to figure out what it is for 3 years, and tonight I think I figured it out." "Reyes, somebody left you somewhere," Ana Reyes said. "Didn't they, ma'am?" And Emily Carter stood up and walked away. 421. The first shot came at 0421. It came from the north hillside, and it went through what was left of the tail boom and made a sound like a dropped wrench, and 8 Americans in the rocks went absolutely flat, and Wendell Pryor said, "Ma'am, we got company. Range of 400, maybe more." He's guessing. "Is he good?" Another shot. It hit 30 meters short. "He's not good," Pryor said, "but he's patient, and ma'am, patient is worse." Emily crawled to the wreck. "Ray?" "Heard it." "Ray, we've got fire on the north side." "Yeah." "Ray, they can see the aircraft." "Yeah." "Ray, they can see the light on the aircraft." And Ray Whitlock, holding an emergency transponder switch with the last strength in his right thumb, said, "Yeah, Doc, I know." And there it was. The whole thing, the entire impossible arithmetic of that night, sitting in the dark on a wash floor between a medic with one good arm and a pilot with no legs. The squawk was the only thing that could bring a rescue. The squawk was the only thing telling a patient man on a hillside exactly where to shoot. "Ray, don't say it. Ray, if you let go, we go dark, and he loses us. And Duval loses us too. Duval has the grid. Duval has a grid in a wash at night in weather with no beacon dock. That's not a grid, that's a wish." Whitlock coughed. It went on a long time. "You know what happens if I let go? Nothing. Nothing happens. Nobody comes. That's what happens. And if you don't let go, that man walks his shots in and kills 8 people. Then he kills me first," Ray Whitlock said. "I'm closest." Emily Carter put both hands on the twisted frame of that cockpit and said, "Ray, I am not letting you do that. Doc, you got no vote. Ray, what's it? You got no vote." And he was shouting, and it was the first and last time in 19 years that Ray Whitlock ever raised his voice, and it cost him something so enormous that Emily heard it leave him. "You got no vote, Doc. Not on this one. I've been sitting here for 40 minutes doing the only useful thing left in my body, and you don't get to take it. You don't get to save everybody. You didn't get to save them either." The silence after that was the loudest thing in Afghanistan. Emily whispered, "What did you say?" And Ray Whitlock gently said, "Doc, everybody knows." 424. Nobody in the Army knew. That was the whole architecture of Emily Carter's life. She had built it out of silence for 7 years, brick by brick, and she had believed in it the way people believe in load-bearing walls. "Everybody knows what," she said. "Korengal." She could not breathe. "Doc, we're aircrew. You think we don't talk?" Whitlock's voice was so tired now, so far away. 11 calls. That's what they say. She called 11 times, and the man said no, and she never told anybody who he was, and she gave back a tab and a school and a stripe and went and got a medic patch, and she's been carrying 4 dead people around in her chest for 7 years like they're in her rucksack. Ray stopped. "And every one of us who ever flew with you knew," Ray Whitlock said, "and not one of us ever said a word because we figured that was yours." Emily Carter, 34 years old in the rocks in the dark, with a rifleman walking rounds in from 400 meters, put her face in her bloody hands. "Doc." She did not answer. "Doc, look at me." She looked. "Tonight ain't Korengal," Ray Whitlock said. "You know how I know? Because tonight somebody's coming." Another round hit the wreck. Closer. "Ray, nobody's coming. He called it off. You heard him." And Ray Whitlock said, "Doc, I heard the first thing he said. You never asked me if I heard the second thing. 426. Emily went absolutely still. What second thing? Comms are one way. I told you that. He was fading. His words were coming apart at the edges. I heard him call it off, and then about 11 minutes later, I heard him launch 3 birds into a corridor that's been a no-fly for 2 years, and Doc, I heard him do it with his own name on it. Say that again. He said, tell them Hollis. Whitlock coughed. Whoever the hell Hollis is. And Emily Carter sat down in the rocks. For the first time all night, she just sat down. Doc, nothing. Doc, who's Hollis? And Emily Carter said, he's the man who said no 11 times. Ray Whitlock was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, well, sounds like he learned. 429. 2 more rounds, both close. Pryor's voice from the rocks. Ma'am, he's found the range. He's found the range, ma'am. We gotta move. Move where, Sergeant? Anywhere that's not here. We have 4 men who can't be moved. Ma'am. We have 4 men who cannot be moved. Emily was on her feet. Where exactly would you like me to carry them? Wendell uphill into the weather. Onto the shelf where he can see all 8 of us at once. Pryor said, Ma'am, I'm asking you to tell me what to do because I've been asking you all night and you've always had an answer, and right now I need you to have an answer. And Emily Carter said nothing because she did not have one. For 11 seconds on that wash floor, Emily Carter did not have an answer, and every man there felt the temperature of the night change, and Anna Reyes said quietly from the dark, oh no. And then Ray Whitlock said, Doc, Ray, there's a flare kit under my seat. Ray, a flare will light us up like, yeah, said Ray Whitlock. It will. 431. She understood it before he finished saying it. No. Doc, no, Ray. You throw it 400 meters up the wash and every eye on that hillside goes to it and every round on that hillside goes to it and it burns for 90 seconds. He was almost whispering now. And in 90 seconds, a man with no legs can hold a switch and 8 people can get flat and small in the dark and nobody has to die. Ray, you can't throw a flare. Of course I can't. A laugh, wet, ruined, and absolutely delighted. You can. And when it burns out, you light another one. How many are there? 4, 6 minutes. Yeah. Duval is 40 minutes out, Ray. And Ray Whitlock said, then I guess we better hope somebody else is closer. 433. She threw the first one at 0433. She got out into the open with her one good arm, and she threw it as far as a human being can throw anything. And she was still running back when the whole world lit up 400 meters away, and every round on that hillside went to it. She made it into the rocks with 2 seconds to spare. Pryor grabbed her by the vest and hauled her down and screamed into her face, Ma'am, are you insane? 90 seconds, Emily said. Get everybody flat. The second one she threw at 0435. The third at 0436, and this one she did not get back clean. Something went through the meat of her left calf and took her down at 30 meters. And she crawled the rest of it, dragging that leg over rock, and Ana Reyes came out of cover one-handed and got a fist in her collar and pulled, and both of them went into the rocks in a tangle, and Reyes screamed, Ma'am, I'm good. You're not good. You're Reyes. Is anybody dead? No, ma'am. Then I'm good. 438. 1 flare left. Emily Carter lay on her back in the rocks with a hole in her calf and her hands shaking for the first time all night. And she looked at that last flare and she did the math, and the math said 90 seconds. 90 seconds, and then it went dark, and then a patient man on a hillside started shooting at the only light left in that valley, which was a small blinking beacon on a broken helicopter that a dying pilot was holding on with his thumb. Ray, here. Ray, 1 flare. Yeah. Ray, after that, you have to let go. Nothing. Ray? Doc, Ray Whitlock said, and his voice was almost gone now, almost nothing. I'm not going to be here for the flare. Emily Carter said, Ray, don't. Doc, listen. Doc, I want to tell you about Marcus. Ray, stay with me. My brother, 11 years. A breath, a terrible breath. He went down in Ambar, and there was a man who called off the extraction, and I hated that man for 11 years, Doc. 11 years. I built a whole life out of hating him. Ray. And tonight I found out he'd have been right. Whitlock laughed, and it was the softest sound Emily had ever heard from him. Because look at us. Look at what happens when they come. Doc, they shouldn't have come. It was a bad call to come. It was the wrong call, and they came anyway, and that's the only reason anybody's breathing down here. He stopped. Ray. Doc, I'm still holding. I know, Ray. You tell Tyler, Ray Whitlock said. You tell him I heard the name. You tell him I heard Grace. I'll tell him. Doc, I'm still holding it. I know. Doc. And then out of the storm, from somewhere impossible, a rotor. Not from the south, not from where Duval had gone, from the north. From over the ridge, through the weather. Through the thing that no aircraft in that theater was allowed to fly through at 400 kilometers per hour, of pure stupidity, came a helicopter that had launched 26 minutes earlier with a full colonel of the United States Army sitting in the left seat of it for the first time in 6 years and 4 months. And a voice came over the handheld radio lying in the rocks, and it was a voice that Emily Carter had heard 11 times in one night 7 years ago, and never once since. It said, "Any station this net, this is Hollis. Carter, if you can hear me, that's 8. I've got the number. Say your position, and I will come and get every single one of them." Emily Carter did not move. Pryor said, "Ma'am, who is that?" Reyes said, "Ma'am, answer him. Ma'am, answer him." And Emily Carter sat in the rocks with a hole in her leg and a dead helicopter behind her, and 8 people breathing because of her. And she picked up that radio with a hand that had finally started to shake, and she keyed it, and for 3 full seconds, she could not make a sound. Then she said one word, "Colonel." And on the other end, 400 meters up and coming down through the worst weather in Afghanistan, a man who had not cried in 30 years said, "I'm here, Emily, I'm here. I'm here." And behind her in the wreck, Ray Whitlock's thumb slipped off the switch, 439. The light went out. It did not flicker. It did not fade. One instant, there was a small blinking beacon on a broken aircraft in a black wash in Afghanistan, and the next instant, there was nothing at all. And in that nothing, a voice on a handheld radio said, "Carter, I've lost your squawk. Carter, Emily, I've lost the squawk." Emily Carter was already moving. She went across 40 meters of rock on a leg with a hole through the calf, and she did not feel one step of it, and she got to that shattered cockpit and put her hand over Ray Whitlock's hand and pressed his thumb back down onto the switch with her own. "Ray." Nothing. "Ray, hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it." His hand was warm. His hand was warm, and it was completely still. And Emily Carter, who had been doing this for 11 years, who knew exactly what a still warm hand meant, said, "No, you don't. You do not." She got 2 fingers on his neck. "Ma'am," Pryor behind her. "Ma'am, the light's back. Get away from the aircraft." "Ma'am, is he?" "Get away from the aircraft. Sergeant, he's shooting at the light." A round came through the cabin 4 feet over her head and went out the other side, and Wendell Pryor hit the dirt and did not get up. Emily did not move. She knelt in the open beside a dead man's hand with her thumb on a switch and rounds coming in, and she pressed her fingers into his neck, and she waited for something that was not there. The radio said, "Carter, I've got you. I've got the squawk. Do not move from that beacon. Do you hear me? Say something. Emily, say something." And Emily Carter keyed the radio with her chin and said in a voice that came from somewhere very far away, "Colonel, be advised, the man holding this switch is gone." Silence. Then Hollis said, "Say again, medical." "He held it for 51 minutes, Emily said. "He was pinned at the console, both legs. He knew at minute 4. He did the math while I was unconscious, and he decided the only useful thing left in his body was his thumb." Medical. "His name is Chief Warrant Officer 4 Raymond Whitlock. He has 3,100 hours. His brother Marcus went down in Umbar 11 years ago, and nobody came for him." Her voice never once moved. "And he told me 20 minutes ago that if anybody ever came for anybody, it would have been the wrong call, and he was glad somebody made it anyway." 400 meters up in the left seat of an aircraft flying through weather that should have killed it, Colonel Vance Hollis put his forehead against the windscreen for exactly 1 second. Then he said, "Medical, I'm 4 minutes out. Hold that switch." "Colonel." "Hold that switch, Captain." "Colonel, if I hold this switch, he keeps shooting at it." "Then hold it anyway," Vance Hollis said, "because this time I am not letting go of you." 441, Chief Warrant Officer Bill Marsh in the right seat said, "Sir, I got to tell you something." "Say it." "Sir, I can't do what Duval did." That one skid thing? I'm not that guy, sir. Nobody's that guy. That's why they talk about Duval. I know. Sir, I looked at the shelf on the way in, and I don't have it. I'm sorry. I've got 1,900 hours, and I do not have that in my hands. Hollis said, then we don't use the shelf. Sir, the wash floor is loose rock. She said herself we roll. So we roll. Marsh turned his head. Sir, say again. Chief, how many people are down there? 8, sir. And how many can we carry? 6, sir, maybe. So the math already doesn't work, Hollis said. The math has never worked tonight, not once, not for anybody, and every single person in this valley has been solving it anyway for 2 hours. He looked over. He was 52 years old, and he had a face like a closed door, and something behind it had come open. Chief, put me on that floor. If we roll, we roll. We'll be 8 and 2 on the ground instead of 8 and none, and I will take those odds every day of my life. Bill Marsh said, Sir, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire career. Noted. Sir, I'd like it in the record that I said that. Chief, if we live, you can put it on a plaque. Marsh started down, 443. Reyes crawled to her. She crawled with a splinted arm across open rock with rounds coming in, and she got beside Emily Carter, and she looked at what was in that cockpit, and she made a sound that had no words in it at all. Ma'am? Reyes, get back. Ma'am, is that? Get back. Ma'am, that's Ray. Anna Reyes was shaking. Ma'am, that's Ray. I've flown with him for 4 years. That's ma'am. He taught me how to do a running landing. He taught me, ma'am. Reyes. Ma'am, he's got a picture of a dog in his kneeboard. Did you know that? Not a wife, not a kid, a dog. His neighbor's dog because he ain't home enough to have his own. Anna. Reyes stopped. Anna, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Emily said, because I only have one hand and I need yours. Ma'am, there's one flare left. It's under the seat. It's about 8 inches from your knee, and I cannot reach it because if I let go of this switch, nobody finds us. Anna Reyes looked at the flare. Then she looked at the 400 meters of open wash she would have to run into with a compound fracture in her forearm. Ma'am, she said, I want you to know I'm real mad about this. Noted. Real mad. And Anna Reyes got up and ran. 444. She got 70 meters before the first round came at her. She got 140 before the second, and she was screaming the whole way, screaming with her arms swinging in a splint and her boots slipping on loose rock. And at 160 meters, she threw that flare underhand like a softball pitch, and it went maybe 40 more, and it lit. Every eye on that hillside went to it. Every round on that hillside went to it. And Anna Reyes turned around and ran 200 meters back and through a lit-up wash with nothing at all between her and a patient man with a rifle, except the fact that he was looking at something else. She got into the rocks and collapsed and vomited and started laughing. Pryor grabbed her. Reyes, you're hit. I'm not hit. There's blood all over your... It's my arm, Sergeant. It's been out of my arm for 2 hours. Get off me. She was laughing so hard she could not breathe. Ma'am, 90 seconds. Copy, Emily said. Everybody flat. 445. And into 90 seconds of the brightest light in Afghanistan came a helicopter with a full colonel in the left seat. Marsh did not land it. Nobody could have landed it. He put it into the wash at about 15 knots, and the loose rock took the skids exactly the way Emily Carter had said it would. And the aircraft slewed and dug in and went up onto its right side and stopped there at an angle. No aircraft is supposed to stop, at rotors chewing into the ground, and the sound of it was the sound of the world ending. The rotors came apart. Pieces of them went out across that wash at the speed of sound, and one of them went through the wreck of dust-off 266 feet from Emily Carter's head. Then it was quiet, absolutely, completely quiet. And Wendell Pryor said into that quiet, they came in on their side, ma'am. Ma'am, they came in on their side. Emily said, Sergeant, go. Ma'am, go. He went. He went across that wash at a dead sprint in 90 seconds of flare light and got to that crumpled aircraft and hauled the door. And inside it, he found a warrant officer named Bill Marsh hanging in his straps with blood on his face and a 52-year-old colonel of the United States Army already out of his harness and already crawling toward the cargo door and already saying, how many are still up? How many, Sergeant? Sir, are you? How many? 8, sir, 8 up. Vance Hollis stopped. 8, he said. Yes, sir, all 8, sir. And Colonel Vance Hollis, on his hands and knees in a wrecked helicopter at the bottom of a valley in Afghanistan, put his head down and said, all 8, 447. The flare burned out. The dark came back so completely that Pryor had to hold Hollis's sleeve to move him, and they went across that wash by feel and by memory and by the sound of a woman's voice saying, over here, keep coming, over here. And then they were there, and Vance Hollis and Emily Carter were in the same 3 feet of ground for the first time in 7 years. He could not see her face. She could not see his. That was the mercy of the thing, and both of them knew it, and neither one of them ever said so. Captain, Colonel, are you hit? Calf, through and through, it's nothing. Anybody else? All 8 are hit, sir. That's what urgent means. Hollis said Emily, and she said don't. Emily, sir, we have 4 men who cannot be moved, 1 crew chief with a compound fracture, 1 warrant officer in your aircraft with a head laceration and probable concussion, a rifleman on the North Hillside who is patient and who will find us again in about 6 minutes when his eyes come back and no aircraft. Her voice was flat as a floor. So with respect, sir, whatever you flew 400 kilometers to say it later. Or don't say it, but not now. Silence. Then Vance Hollis said, copy, Captain. What do you need? And that Wendell Pryor said afterward was the moment, not the flying, not the flare. That, a full colonel of the United States Army in the dark on the ground said, what do you need to a captain with a hole in her leg? And she told him, and he did it. 449. Sir, can you carry? I can carry. Sir, you're 52. Captain, I can carry. Then take the north end of that litter and do not let his head move more than an inch in any direction, because if it does, he stops breathing, and I will not be able to fix it in the dark. Understood. Sir, that's my last man who can't be moved, and we're moving him. Where? There's a lip of rock 40 meters east. It's the only thing in this valley between us and that hillside. We put everybody behind it, and we get small, and we wait for Duval. Hollis said, Duval's not coming. Everything stopped. Say again, sir. The corridor closed behind me. Hollis's voice did not change. I came through it and it shut. Duval's got 3 urgent and he's 40 minutes from base, and by the time he offloads and turns, that weather's on the deck for 6 hours. Nothing is coming into this valley until 0600 at the earliest, and that's optimistic. Nobody spoke. Then Ana Reyes from the dark said, Sir, with respect, then what the hell are you doing here? And Vance Hollis said, I came to be here. Sir. Sergeant, I didn't come to rescue anybody. There's no rescuing anybody. There is no aircraft that can get in here for 6 hours. He took the north end of a litter and lifted it. I came so that when it happens, it doesn't happen to you alone. 452. They moved Bo Kettering 40 meters in 11 minutes. They moved him 1 boot length at a time in absolute darkness, with a 52-year-old colonel on the north end and a medic with a hole in her leg on the south end, and Emily Carter's voice counting cadence in a whisper, and every 4 steps Kettering said, Doc, and every 4 steps Emily said, I've got you, Corporal, and neither one of them stopped. At the lip of rock, Kettering said, Ma'am. Say it. Ma'am, my mom's name is Renee Kettering Tulsa, and you're going to tell her yourself, and I'm going to be standing right there when you do, and I'm going to be extremely annoying about it. Bo Kettering laughed. He laughed with a broken spine at the bottom of a valley with 6 hours of dark ahead of him and no aircraft coming, and Vance Hollis heard that laugh, and something in the man's chest tore right down the middle. Captain. Sir. Where's your pilot? Emily said. 40 meters west, sir, in his seat. We're going back for him. Sir, he's gone. I know he's gone. Sir, that beacon is the only thing on this floor that man on the hillside can see, and if we go back for a body, and Vance Hollis said, Captain, in 7 years, has there been one single day you didn't think about the 4 you left on that mountain? Emily Carter did not answer. Because there hasn't been one for me, Hollis said. Not one day, and I only heard about them on a radio. 456. They went back for Ray Whitlock. 4 of them went in the dark, 400 meters round trip into the only lit thing in that valley, and they cut him out of that seat with a multi-tool and a pry bar and Wendell Pryor's bare hands. And when they got him free, Vance Hollis reached in and shut the beacon off himself, and the whole valley went black. And Emily Carter said, "Sir, we just went dark. Nothing can find us now." "I know. Sir, you just turned off the only—" "Captain, he held that switch for 51 minutes so that somebody would come." Hollis had Ray Whitlock's shoulders in his hands. "Somebody came. It's off because it worked." They carried him 40 meters east. Nobody dropped him. 501. And then there was nothing to do. That was the part nobody was ready for. 2 hours of moving, 2 hours of hands and voices, an impossible arithmetic, and then 8 Americans behind a lip of rock in the dark, with 6 hours in front of them, and nothing left to solve. Sanchez was gone on Duval's bird. Nunn was gone. Kettering was here. Brooks was gone. The 3 ground element wounded were here, quiet, patient, bleeding, slowly the way men do who have decided not to make a fuss. Reyes said, "Ma'am." "Sergeant." "Ma'am, permission to ask the thing I asked before." "No, ma'am." "Ma'am, somebody left you somewhere." Reyes. "And he's sitting right there," Anna Reyes said. "Ain't it he, ma'am?" Nobody breathed, and Vance Hollis said into the dark, "Yes, I am." 503. "Sir." "Sergeant Reyes, is it?" "Yes, sir." "Sergeant, 7 years ago, I was the man on the other end of a radio in the Korengal." Hollis's voice was perfectly steady and perfectly ruined. "There was a young NCO on the ground with civilians and casualties, and she called for extraction 11 times. I had weather, and I had threat, and I had numbers on a board, and every single time she called, I ran the math, and every single time the math said no." Reyes said nothing. "And on the 11th call, she stopped asking." Hollis stopped, started again. "She said, 'Colonel, be advised, I have 4. And then she said their names, one at a time. Nico Vance, Charlie Doss, Marisol Ruiz, Adam Weir." Emily Carter said very quietly, "Sir, stop." And then she said, "Colonel, that's 4. And she went off the net, and I never heard her voice again until tonight." "Sir, stop." "Captain, I have carried those 4 names for 7 years, and I have never once said them out loud. And I am going to say them here because this is the only place on earth where anybody would understand what they cost." And Emily Carter said, "Sir, one of them was holding my hand." Silence. "Which one?" Hollis said. "Adam." "Emily." "He was 23 and he had a tooth that was crooked and he was embarrassed about it and he wouldn't smile in pictures." Her voice broke. For the first time in 2 hours in 11 years in a whole life, Emily Carter's voice broke completely. "And he held my hand and he asked me if you were coming and I said yes. Sir, I said yes. 11 times I asked you and 11 times you said no, and every single time I turned around and told him yes." Nobody in that valley moved. "And he died believing me," Emily Carter said. "And I have spent 7 years wondering whether that was a kindness or the cruelest thing I ever did to another human being." 507. Vance Hollis said, "It was a kindness." "Sir." "Captain, I've had 7 years to think about it and about 400 kilometers tonight, to be certain, and I am telling you it was a kindness, and I'm telling you because I'm the only person alive who has any right to." "Sir, you have no right at all." "No," Hollis said. "I don't, but I'm the only one who was there." And that was true, and everybody in that wash heard that it was true, and Anna Reyes started to cry silently in the dark with a broken arm, and Wendell Pryor put his face in his hands. "Emily, don't." "Emily, the math was right that night. That's the part nobody says out loud. The math was right. If I'd launched it into the Korengal in that weather, I'd have lost a bird and 8 more, and every board that ever looked at it said the same thing, and they were correct." "Then why are you here, sir?" "Because I've had 7 years to learn something," Vance Hollis said, "and here it is. The math is right, and it is not the only true thing." 509. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Bo Kettering said, "Sir, Corporal." "Sir, I gotta be honest with you. I got no idea what any of you are talking about." And Vance Hollis laughed. It came out of him like something breaking loose. "That's fair, Corporal. But sir, can I say a thing?" "Say it." "Sir, tonight she told me to tell my mom myself." Kettering's voice was thick. "And I believed her, sir. And I'm laying here with a broke back at the bottom of a hole with 6 hours of dark, and I still believe her. And I don't know if that's true or not, sir, but I know I ain't scared. And an hour ago, I was so scared I couldn't breathe." Silence. Sir, whatever she did to that boy in the Korangal, Bo Kettering said, she just did it to me. And sir, I'm real grateful for it. And Emily Carter put her hand over her mouth. 5:14. At 05:14, the man on the hillside started walking rounds along the lip of rock. He was patient. He had always been patient. He had lost his light and lost his beacon, and he had spent 20 minutes putting his eyes back, and now he was doing what patient men do, which is to shoot at every place a person might be until a person is there. Ma'am. Pryor. He's guessing. Yes. Ma'am, he's guessing left to right, and we're on the right. Yes. Ma'am, in about 4 minutes, he's going to guess correctly. And Emily Carter said, Colonel, is there anything in that aircraft? Marshsburg. Yes, sir. There's a radio that's a brick and a gun that's under 2,000 pounds of airframe and a first aid kit that I already brought you. Sir, is there fuel? Silence. Then Vance Hollis said, say again, Captain. Sir, is there fuel in that aircraft? There's about 1,100 pounds of JP-8 in that aircraft. Sir, Emily Carter said, how big a fire is 1,100 pounds? 516. Hollis said, Emily, that's my aircraft. Yes, sir. Emily, that's the only shelter in this wash, and it's the only thing with any structure to it, and if a bird ever does get in here at 0600, that airframe is the only thing they'll see. Yes, sir. And you want to burn it. Sir, I want that man to look at something for 6 hours that isn't us. Her voice was perfectly calm. A fire that size burns for a very long time. It lights up 400 meters of wash floor at the wrong end. It ruins his eyes, it ruins his optic, and it gives him something to shoot at that doesn't bleed. And sir, at 0600, a fire is the biggest signal in this valley. Nobody breathed. Captain Hollis said, do you understand that I will be relieved for this? Yes, sir. Do you understand that I called off an extraction tonight launched into a closed corridor against a standing restriction, wrecked one aircraft, and if I now burn the wreck? Yes, sir. And Vance Hollis said, good. Where's the flare gun? 519. It went up at 0519. 1,100 pounds of jet fuel at the bottom of a valley in Afghanistan, and the whole world turned orange, and 400 meters up a hillside, a patient man stopped shooting entirely because there was nothing to shoot at anymore that wasn't a fire. 8 Americans lay behind a lip of rock and watched a helicopter burn. Reyes said, sir, Sergeant, sir, that's your career. And Vance Hollis said, Sergeant, that's the warmest I've been all night. Pryor started laughing. Kettering started laughing. And then all 8 of them were laughing behind a rock at the bottom of a hole, with 6 hours of dark ahead of them, and a body lying beside them, and a fire where an aircraft used to be laughing the way people laugh exactly once in a life. Emily Carter did not laugh. She sat with Ray Whitlock's head in her lap, and she put her hand on his chest where a hand had been all night. And she said so quietly that only Vance Hollis heard it, hey, somebody came. 6:02, the weather lifted at 06:02. Nobody could explain it. The meteorologist at Bagram spent 3 days trying and never got closer than luck. And at 06:11, out of a clean gray sky, came Frank Duvall. He came in over the ridge, and he saw a column of black smoke standing 400 meters into the air, off the floor of a corridor. Nobody was allowed to fly. And Sam Ostrowski said, Chief, that's a burn. Chief, that's a crash burn, that's... And Frank Duvall said, no, it ain't. Chief, Sam, that's a signal. Look at it. Look at the size of it. Ain't nobody's crash burns for 50 minutes. His hands were already moving. Somebody down there burned an aircraft on purpose. He put it in the wash at 0613, and Emily Carter stood up on a leg with a hole in it, and Vance Hollis stood up beside her, and 8 Americans came out from behind a lip of rock in the daylight, and Frank Duvall came off that aircraft and stopped dead and counted. He counted twice. Then he said 8, and Emily Carter said 9, Chief. And she turned around and looked at Ray Whitlock, lying in the rocks with his hands folded on his chest and his flight helmet under his head, and Frank Duvall took off his own helmet and stood there in the wind and did not say anything at all for a long time. Then he said, ma'am, who was he? He was the man holding the switch. 7:04, the Medevac came into Bagram at 07:04 on a Tuesday morning. Word had gone 40 minutes ahead of it, the way word does, the way it always does, moving through an entire base by some mechanism no army has ever been able to explain. It moved through the aid station, in the flight line, in the chow hall, in the maintenance bay, and it moved wrong the way it always moves wrong. And what people heard was 9 down in the corridor all dead, and the colonel went in after them, and he's dead too. So they came out. They came out to stand on a flight line at 7 in the morning and watch a helicopter bring back bodies, because that is what you do. Because somebody should be standing there, because nobody comes home to an empty ramp. There were maybe 200 of them. Then 4, then 6. And when Frank Duval put that aircraft on the ramp at 07:04, the doors opened and Wendell Pryor stepped out and he was walking. Nobody understood it. For about 2 seconds, 600 Americans on a flight line at Bagram did not understand what they were looking at, and then Ana Reyes came out with her arm in a splint made out of a helicopter seat, and she was walking. And then Bo Kettering came out on a litter and his eyes were open, and then a colonel of the United States Army came out with soot on his face and blood on his uniform, and he was walking, and the sound that started on that flight line was not a cheer. It was not a cheer. It started at the back with a young mechanic who had not slept, and it went through 600 people in about 4 seconds, and it was a sound nobody there had ever heard before, and none of them ever forgot. They cried. 600 soldiers on a flight line in Afghanistan stood in the rotor wash at 7 in the morning and cried like children because they had come out to receive the dead, and the dead were walking. And then Emily Carter came out. She came out last because she had been the last one on, because there had been an argument about it that Frank Duval lost. She came out on one leg with a shoulder that had been out and put back, and blood in her hair from a scalp wound she had never once mentioned, and she was holding the end of a litter, and on that litter was Ray Whitlock. She would not let go of it. 2 medics tried to take it. She would not let go of it. She walked that litter across the whole length of that ramp herself with 600 people crying on either side of her, and she did not look at one of them, and when they got to the door, she said, "His name is Chief Warrant Officer 4 Raymond Whitlock. He held an emergency transponder switch with his thumb for 51 minutes with both legs crushed so that somebody could find us." Nobody moved. "He is the reason all 8 of us are standing here," Emily Carter said. "Write that down. Somebody write that down right now, because in 6 months there's going to be a board, and a board is going to need to look at the math, and the math is going to say nobody should have come, and the math is going to be right." She let go of the litter. Somebody did write it down. That was the first thing Emily Carter learned about the United States Army that she had not already known in 11 years, that when a captain says, "Write that down" on a flight line in front of 600 people, somebody always does. In this case, it was a specialist named Priya Ochoa from Public Affairs, 23 years old, who had come out to the ramp expecting to photograph a dignified transfer, and instead stood there with her camera hanging around her neck, not taking a single picture. Writing on the back of her own hand with a ballpoint pen because she did not have paper. She wrote he held the switch for 51 minutes. She wrote it in ink on her own skin, and she would not wash her hand for 2 days. 9:06. They put Emily Carter on a table in the aid station at 09:06, and a surgeon named Halverson looked at her calf, and then at her shoulder, and then at her scalp, and then at her chart. And then he put the chart down and said, "Captain, how long have you been walking on this?" "What time is it?" "Oh, 900. "Since about 04:30. Halverson said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "And the shoulder?" "Oh, 337. "Who reduced it?" "I did." "With what?" "A rock." Halverson picked the chart back up, mostly so he would have something to do with his hands. "Captain, I want to be very clear. You have a through and through, a reduced glenohumeral dislocation, a scalp black that's going to need about 14 staples, and you have been performing field medicine on 9 casualties for 5 hours. There's a word for that. Sir, is the word going to help anybody in this room?" "No," Halverson said, "it's not." "Then let's skip it." He started working. And then, because he was 58 years old and had been doing this since Mogadishu and had never once said a thing like this out loud, he said, "Captain, I've got a man 2 curtains down with a needle in his chest and a hole in him. Do you know what he's been saying since they wheeled him in?" Emily did not answer. "He's been saying grace," Halverson said. "Just that, over and over. We thought he was praying." And Emily Carter, flat on a table with 14 staples going into her scalp, closed her eyes and said, "He's not praying, he's naming his daughter." 11:20, Oscar Sanchez came off the table at 11:20 after 4 hours and 11 units. The vascular surgeon who put him back together, a lieutenant colonel named Fitch, who had been doing this a long time and did not impress easily, came out into the hallway, pulled his mask down, and asked the first question that came into his head. Who packed that wound? Sir, I said who packed it because somebody put pressure on a junctional bleed and held it through an auto-rotation impact and then repacked it in the dark, and I want a name because I'm putting it in my op note. The nurse said, sir, they're saying it was the medic, Carter. With what? What did she pack it with? Sir, the nurse hesitated. Sir, they said she used 2 fingers of a staff sergeant named Pryor because she didn't have a hand free. Fitch stared at her. She talked him through it, the nurse said, the whole way down. Sir, he's out in the waiting room. He won't leave. He's been sitting there for 4 hours and he won't wash his hands. Fitch went out to the waiting area. Wendell Pryor stood up when he saw the scrubs. He was 34 years old and 210 pounds, and he had carried a boy up a mountain and he was shaking so badly he could not get his hands into his pockets. Sir, is he? Sergeant, sit down. Sir, please, is he? Sergeant. Fitch put a hand on his shoulder. He's alive. He's going to Landstuhl tonight. He's going to keep the leg. Wendell Pryor sat down very slowly and then he put his face in his hands, and then a room full of strangers watched a very large man come completely apart. Fitch sat down next to him. Sergeant, I want to tell you something and I want you to actually hear it because in about 6 months you're going to start telling yourself a different story about last night and I want to get out in front of it. Pryor said nothing. Those were your fingers, Fitch said. Not hers, yours. She had the knowledge. You had the hands. And that boy is alive because a man who is not a medic put 2 fingers into another man's body at the worst moment of his life and did not take them out for 2 hours. He stood up. Sergeant, I've been a surgeon for 26 years and I have never once said this to anybody. You did the operation. I just closed. 1400, the board convened 11 days later. That was fast. Everybody knew it was fast. Boards do not convene in 11 days unless somebody very senior wants a fire put out before it reaches the tree line. And everybody in that building knew exactly which fire and exactly which tree line. And the tree line was a colonel who had in one night called off an extraction, launched 3 aircraft into a corridor, understanding restriction, flown as a non-current pilot, lost 2 airframes, and then personally set fire to one of them with a flare gun. The board president was a brigadier named Lorna Adkins, and she was known for 2 things. She had never once been in a hurry, and she had never once been fooled. She read the charge sheet out loud. It took 4 minutes. Then she said, Colonel Hollis, do you dispute any of the facts as read? And Vance Hollis stood up and said, no, ma'am, not one. None of it. Ma'am, I'd add one. The flare gun was mine, but the idea was Captain Carter's, and I wanted on the record that I overruled nothing and I invented nothing. She proposed it, I understood it, and I pulled the trigger. Adkins put down her pen. Colonel, you understand, you're the only man in this room who can be relieved today. Yes, ma'am. And you're volunteering the one fact that makes it worse. Ma'am, Hollis said, I have spent 7 years being extremely careful about what I put on a record. It hasn't worked out. Somebody in the gallery laughed. Adkins did not. Colonel, at 0311 you called off the extraction. Yes, ma'am. Say the words you used. Vance Hollis said, I said negative on the extraction. That bird is a loss. Do not risk assets on a lost bird. And I said it twice, ma'am, because the first time I said it, nobody in the room moved, and I wanted to be sure they'd heard me. The gallery went completely silent. And at 0326, Adkins said, you launched 3 aircraft. Yes, ma'am. Colonel, help me. What changed in 15 minutes? And Hollis said, the symbol moved, ma'am. Say again. There was a symbol on a screen that was supposed to be a wreck, and it moved downhill under control at 110 knots toward the one piece of terrain in that valley under the weather. His voice did not rise. It never rose. Ma'am, I had written those people off, and then those people declined. Atkins looked at him for a long moment. Colonel, that's a very good line. Ma'am, it's not a line, it's just what happened. 1417, they called Emily Carter at 1417. She came in on a cane. She had refused the wheelchair twice and refused the crutches once, and she came in on a cane and stood at the table and did not sit until Adkins told her to, and then play like it cost her something. Captain Carter, ma'am, you were the senior medical officer on Dustoff 26. Yes, ma'am. You had no command authority on that aircraft. No, ma'am. Then explain to me, Adkins said, how it is that every single person on that mountain, including a full colonel of the United States Army, describes a chain of decisions that begins and ends with you. Emily Carter said, ma'am, that's not accurate. Which part? All of it, ma'am. Chief Whitlock flew that aircraft off a ridge with no tail rotor and no chance, and he made every decision that mattered. Chief Duvall put an aircraft on one skid over 400 feet of nothing. Sergeant Reyes ran 200 meters into open ground with a compound fracture to throw a flare. Sergeant Pryor kept 2 fingers in a man's femoral for 2 hours. Private Brooks kept a chest seal down through an impact at 40 knots while he was unconscious. Ma'am, unconscious. His hand never moved. She stopped. Ma'am, I gave instructions. That's my job. Everybody else did the actual thing. Adkins said, Captain, do you know what every single one of them said when I asked them the same question? No, ma'am. They said the same thing you just did. About you. Adkins leaned back. 9 people, 9 statements, and every one of them insists the hero was somebody else in the aircraft. Do you know what that's called, Captain? Emily said. Ma'am, I don't. Neither do I, said Lorna Atkins, but I've been doing this 29 years and I've never seen it. 1,431. Captain, one more thing and then I'll let you go. Ma'am, there's a line in Chief Duvall's statement I need you to explain. Atkins found it. At 0409 on the radio, you asked him to relay a message. You said, tell Colonel Hollis that this time I've got 8. The room did not move. Captain, what is this time? Emily Carter said nothing. Captain, nothing. Captain Carter, I am asking you a direct question in a formal proceeding. And Vance Hollis stood up in the back of that room and said, Ma'am, I'll answer it. Colonel, sit down. Ma'am, with respect, she's protected me for 7 years, and I'm not going to let her do it in a courtroom. Colonel Hollis, sit down. Ma'am, in the Korengal 7 years ago, Sergeant First Class Emily Carter called me 11 times for an extraction, and I said no 11 times, and 4 people died. Vance Hollis's voice went across that room like a door slamming. She has never told a single human being who was on the other end of that radio, not in the after action, not to a board, not to her own team. 7 years, ma'am. She ate it and she gave back her tone and her school and her stripe and went and became a medic. And she has never once said my name out loud until she said it into a radio at the bottom of that wash to tell me the number was 8. Nobody breathed. Adkins said very quietly, Captain Carter, is that accurate? And Emily Carter said, ma'am, the math was right. That's not what I asked you. Ma'am, I've read every board finding on the Korengal, 3 separate boards. They all said the same thing, and they were all correct. If he'd launched, he'd have lost a bird and 8 more, and there'd be 12 names instead of 4. Adkins said, Captain, I'll ask you a 3rd time. Is the colonel's statement accurate? And Emily Carter looked up. Ma'am, she said, he came. Captain, ma'am, you asked me what this time means. Her voice finally moved. Just once, just at the edge. It means that 7 years ago, a man ran the math and the math said no and he obeyed it. And 11 days ago, that same man ran the same math and got the same answer and got in the aircraft anyway. And ma'am, I've had 11 days to think about it, and here's what I've got. The math was right both times, and the second time 8 people came home. The room was absolutely still. Ma'am, if you relieve him for that, Emily Carter said, then I'd like you to understand what you're actually teaching every colonel in this army. You're teaching them the price of the second answer. And ma'am, I've already paid that price once, and I'm the only person in this building who knows what it costs, and I'm telling you it's too much. Lorna Atkins took off her glasses. Then she said, Captain, you're excused. Ma'am, Captain Carter, Atkins said, you're excused, and God help me, I don't want you in this room while I decide. 1602. The finding came down at 1602, and it took Lorna Atkins 91 minutes, which everybody agreed was about 90 minutes longer than it needed to be, and exactly as long as it deserved. Colonel Vance Hollis was found to have violated a standing flight restriction, operated as a non-current aviator, and destroyed government property valued at approximately $11 million. He was given a letter of reprimand. It was filed locally, which if you do not speak Army sounds like nothing. And if you do speak Army means that a brigadier general looked at a career that could have been ended with a signature and decided on the record in writing that she would rather have the man. Adkins read the finding out, and then she put the paper down and said one more thing off the record, which was later typed up by a stenographer who had decided on her own that history was going to want it. Colonel, she said, for what it's worth, and it's worth nothing. 29 years I've read a lot of statements, and I've never once read one where the ground element and the air crew and the rescue crew all agree on everything. She stood up. Yours all agree. And what they agree on is that at 03:11, you were the worst officer in the United States Army, and at 03:26, you were the best one, and it was the same man, and it was 15 minutes. Hollis said, ma'am, that's about right. Colonel, one question, off the record, everybody in this building wants to know, and nobody's got the guts. Ma'am, why'd you get in the aircraft Duval was already going? You had 3 birds airborne. You had done the brave thing already. Why did a 52-year-old colonel who hadn't flown in 6 years put himself in that seat? And Vance Hollis said, because there was nobody left to be the man who came, ma'am. I'd already been the man who didn't. One Grace Elise Nunn was born on a Thursday in March in a hospital in Georgia at 7 pounds 4 ounces. Her father was there. That is the whole sentence, and it is the only one that matters. Tyler James Nunn was there standing up with a scar on his chest the shape of a thumb and a smaller one under it the shape of a needle. And when they put that child in his arms, he did the thing that every single one of them did eventually, which is that his knees stopped working. His wife, Kayla, who had spent 4 months being told nothing and 11 days being told less, looked up at him and said, say her name. And Tyler Nunn could not. He tried 3 times. 3 times, and he could not do it. And finally, Kayla said, Tyler, honey, what is it? What happened up there? And Tyler Nunn said, there was a woman. Okay. There was a woman, and she had her fist in my chest, and I was going out, Kayla. I was going. And she asked me to say a name, and I didn't have one, and I made one up. He was crying so hard, he had to sit down on the floor of a maternity ward with his daughter in his arms. I made it up, right there. I said, Grace. And she said, Grace, okay, she's waiting. And Kayla, I stayed for 40 minutes because a woman I barely knew told me a person who didn't exist yet was waiting for me. Kayla Nunn said, she's not waiting anymore. She's here. And Tyler said, yeah. So say it. And Tyler James Nunn looked at his daughter and said, Grace. He wrote a letter that night. 2 lines. It took him 4 hours. Ma'am, she's here. Her name is Grace, like we said. He mailed it to a hospital in Colorado because that was the last address anybody had. 14 months. That is how long it took. 14 months of surgeries and rehab, and a shoulder that never went back quite right, and a leg that would ache in February for the rest of her life. And Emily Carter did the whole thing the way she did, everything, which is to say quietly and completely, and without once telling anyone that it hurt. Bo Kettering walked at 11 months. Not well, not far. 11 months, 2 surgeries, a rod in his spine, and a physical therapist named Deshawn, who told him on day 1 that the odds were poor and never once repeated it. And on a Tuesday in his 11th month, Bo Kettering took 4 steps between 2 parallel bars, and then he stopped. And Deshawn said, you okay? And Kettering said, I got to make a call. He called Tulsa. Mom, Bo baby, what's wrong? Mom, I walked. And Renee Kettering, 56, who had been told at 0400 on a Tuesday 14 months ago that her son's spine was broken at the bottom of a valley in a country she could not find on a map, made a sound on the telephone that Bo Kettering will hear until the day he dies. Mom, there's a thing I got to tell you. Anything. Mom, when it happened, when we hit, well, I told a woman to tell you I wasn't scared. He was crying and laughing at the same time. And she said, tell her yourself. Bo, she said, tell her yourself, Mom. And I'm telling you myself. 14 months and 9 days. They did it in a room at the hospital in Colorado, and it was supposed to be small. Daniel Brooks organized it, which surprised everybody who did not know him and surprised nobody who did. He was 21 now. He had a scar through his eyebrow and a screw in his skull and a hand that had never let go. And he had spent 4 months tracking down 8 people across 3 continents, and he had told every single one of them the same lie, which was, it's just a small thing, don't make a fuss. They all made a fuss. Ana Reyes flew in from Fort Hood with a forearm full of hardware and a tattoo on it that said, we see you, in 11 letters, and she got there 4 hours early because she had to be first. And when Wendell Pryor came through the door, she hit him so hard he dropped his bag. Sergeant, you wash your hands yet? And Wendell Pryor, 210 pounds, 35 years old, said, Not yet. And both of them stood in a hospital lobby in Colorado and cried without making any noise at all. Frank Duvall came. He did not want to. He came anyway. He stood in the corner with his arms folded and told 4 separate people that he was only there because he was in town, which was not true because he had flown from Alabama. Oscar Sanchez came on his own 2 legs. He came with his sister from El Paso, the one who teaches 3rd grade, and her name is Marisol. And when she found out that was one of the 4 names from the Korengal, she sat down in the hallway and had to be given a minute. Bill Marsh came. He brought the plaque. It said, "Sir, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire career." And under said Bill Marsh 0441. And under that, he put it on a plaque. Vance Hollis came, and he came last, and he stood in the doorway for a long time before he came in, because he genuinely did not know if he had the right. 9 people in one room, and Emily Carter walked in on a cane and looked at all of them and said, "Brooks, you said this was small." "Yes, ma'am. I lied, ma'am." "You lied to a superior officer." "Yes, ma'am." Daniel Brooks was grinning so hard his face could barely hold it. "I've had a lot of practice being terrible at what I'm told, ma'am. I learned it from somebody." And then he gave her the photograph. It was framed, it was cheap. He had bought it at a drugstore because he was 21 and he did not have money, and it was the single most valuable object in the state of Colorado. The picture was all of them. Everyone who came off that mountain standing together in a hospital hallway, Sanchez in the middle because they made him Kettering in front because he was upright, and by God, they were going to show it Reyes with her arm up, Pryor with his hands in the frame, on purpose, Hollis, at the very edge, because that is where he put himself, and nobody argued. And underneath in Brooks's handwriting, because he would not let anybody type it, because one person refused to give up 5 families got their heroes back. Emily Carter looked at it. She looked at it for a very long time, long enough that the room got uncomfortable, long enough that Reyes said, "Ma'am," and Emily Carter said, "It's wrong." Nobody knew what to say. "Ma'am, it's wrong," she said, "and I need you to fix it." Brooks said, "Ma'am, it says 5 families. Emily's voice was shaking now, and she did not stop it, and she did not apologize for it, and it was the first time in 7 years that any of them had seen her let anything show at all. There were 11 of us, 11 Daniel, and one person is not in this picture, and he is the only reason there is a picture. Silence. "Ma'am," Brooks said, "I know." "Then why?" "Ma'am, look at the back." And Emily Carter turned that frame over. On the back in the same handwriting, it said CW04, Raymond Whitlock. He held the switch for 51 minutes. We put him on the back because he was behind us the whole time. Emily Carter put her hand over her mouth. And Daniel Brooks, 21 years old, said, "Ma'am, and it says 5 because that's how many were on that first bird. And I know it's not everybody. And I did it on purpose because, ma'am," his voice went completely to pieces, "because there's going to be more. There's going to be more of us. Every time you go out, there's going to be more. And I didn't want to put a final number on you, ma'am. You don't get a final number." Nobody in that room said one word. And then Vance Hollis from the edge, where he had put himself, said, "Captain." "Sir, there's one more thing." He crossed that room and he handed her a folder, and she opened it, and inside it was a single sheet of paper. And on that sheet of paper were 4 names: Nico Vance, Charlie Doss, Marisol Ruiz, Adam Weir, and under them a 5th, Raymond Whitlock. And under that, in a colonel's handwriting, "These 5 are mine. The other 8 are hers." "Sir, what is this?" "It's the reprimand," Hollis said. "Adkins filed hers locally. This one I filed with myself. I've been carrying it in my coat for a year, Captain, and I've read it every day, and I'm done reading it, and I'd like you to have it, and I want to tell you why." "Sir, because for 7 years I thought the thing I did wrong was say no." Vance Hollis's eyes were streaming, and his voice never moved. "It wasn't. The math was right. 3 boards said so. I've known it the whole time, and it never helped once." "Then what, sir?" "The thing I did wrong," he said, "was let you carry it alone. You went off that net, and you never said my name, and I let you. I let a 27-year-old sergeant walk out of the Army's spotlight carrying 4 dead people for me, because it was easier for me if she did." He stopped. He got it back. "Captain, that's the reprimand. That's what's in that folder. And I am handing it to you because I want you to see me finally holding it, and then I want you to burn it. Because I've watched you burn one aircraft, and I've never seen anybody do anything better. And Emily Carter said, "Sir, Captain, sir, I'm not going to burn it." "Emily, because it's not yours either," she said. "Sir, that's what I've had 14 months to figure out. You've been carrying 4 names and I've been carrying 4 names, and we've been doing it in separate rooms for 7 years. And sir, they were never 4 names. They were 4 people, and they had families. And those families have been carrying them too, and not one of us ever told the others we were doing it." She held up the folder. "Sir, I'm going to keep this," Emily Carter said. "And in about a month, I'm going to knock on 4 doors, and I'd like you to be standing next to me when I do." Vance Hollis could not speak. "Sir, say yes." And Vance Hollis said yes. That was it. One word. 53 years old, 29 years in uniform, 3 boards, 1 letter of reprimand, 5 names, and the whole thing came down to a man who had said no 11 times, finally saying yes in a hospital room in Colorado in front of 8 people who were only alive because he had learned how. Anna Reyes started clapping. It was ridiculous. It was completely ridiculous. One woman with a metal forearm clapping in a hospital room, and then Pryor joined her, and then Sanchez, and then Kettering, who was standing up on his own 2 legs and clapping, and then all of them, 8 people making an absurd amount of noise in a building where you are supposed to be quiet, and a nurse came to the door and looked in and saw what was in that room and closed the door and let them have it. They never made the news. That is the part people find hardest to believe. There was no parade, there was no cable segment, there was no film. Priya Ochoa's photographs from that flight line are in a box in a warehouse in Maryland, and no one has ever asked for them. But every year on a Tuesday in February, 9 phones ring. And whoever answers says the same thing because Bo Kettering started it, and now it is a law still holding. And the other person says, still holding. And that is all. That is the entire conversation. 9 people, 3 continents, 4 minutes once a year, 2 words each. Emily Carter is still in. She is a major now. She did not want it, and they gave it to her anyway, which is how it works when you are the only person in the building who does not want it. She has never told the story. Not once, not at a school, not at a conference, not to a reporter, not to a board. But there is a young medic somewhere out there right now in the back of an aircraft in the dark, with her hands inside somebody, and she is saying a name out loud because a major told her that a man with a name fights harder than a man on a stretcher. And that medic does not know where the lesson came from. She thinks it is just how it is done. That is what Emily Carter built. Not a medal, not a story. A habit in other people's hands that will outlive every single person who is on that mountain. Because heroes are not the people whose names end up in books. Heroes are the ones who keep holding the switch after there is no reason left to hold it in the dark, where nobody is watching with the last strength in one thumb. Ray Whitlock held it for 51 minutes. Emily Carter has been holding it her whole life, and she has not let go yet.